The doorbell's shrill ring pierced through our quiet Sunday afternoon like a harbinger of doom. I froze, spatula in hand, my eyes meeting Dylan's across the kitchen island. We both knew who it was without having to check. "Maybe if we're quiet, she'll go away," I whispered, hope flickering in my chest. Dylan's shoulders sagged as he shook his head. "You know my mother, Hannah. She'll just use her key if we don't answer." As if on cue, we heard the telltale jingle of keys in the lock. I suppressed a groan, plastering on a smile as Esther bustled into our home, uninvited as always. "There you are," she exclaimed, her eyes zeroing in on me. "I've been ringing that bell for ages. Didn't you hear me?" "Sorry, Esther," I managed, my voice sickly sweet. "We were just about to have lunch. Would you like to join us?" Her eyes narrowed, scrutinizing the half-prepared meal on the counter. "Sandwiches? At your age, you should be preparing proper Sunday roasts, Hannah. How do you expect to give me grandchildren if you can't even cook a decent meal?" I bit my tongue, feeling the familiar sting of her words. Dylan stepped in, his voice tight. "Mom, we weren't expecting company. Hannah's sandwiches are delicious." Esther waved him off, making her way to our living room. "Never mind that now. I've come with exciting news." Dylan and I exchanged wary glances as we followed her. She perched on our sofa, looking entirely too comfortable for my liking. "What news, Mom?" Dylan asked, his hand finding mine and squeezing gently. Esther beamed, her eyes glittering with triumph. "I've found the perfect fertility specialist for you two. Dr. Rosenberg is a miracle worker. I've already made an appointment for next week." The room seemed to tilt sideways. I struggled to find my voice, shock and anger warring inside me. "You did what?" "Now, Hannah, don't be difficult," Esther chided. "I know you two have been trying, and clearly something isn't working. It's time to get professional help." "Mom," Dylan interjected, his voice strained. "We appreciate your concern, but our family planning is private. We don't need—" "Nonsense!" Esther cut him off. "I'm not getting any younger, and I want grandchildren while I can still enjoy them. You two have been married for over a year now. It's time." I felt my cheeks burning, humiliation and rage coursing through me. "Esther, with all due respect, this is completely out of line. Dylan and I will decide when and if we have children. It's not up for discussion." Esther's eyes flashed dangerously. "I see. So you're the one holding things up, are you? I always knew you weren't good enough for my Dylan. A real wife would." "That's enough." Dylan's voice boomed, startling us both. I'd never heard him raise his voice to his mother before. "Mom, you need to leave. Now." Esther's mouth gaped open in shock. "But Dylan, I only want what's best for you. This woman is my wife," Dylan said firmly, standing up, "and I won't have you disrespecting her in our home. Please leave." For a moment, I thought Esther might argue further, but something in Dylan's stance must have convinced her. She gathered her purse, her lips pressed into a thin line. "This isn't over," she hissed as she swept past us. The door slammed behind her, leaving a ringing silence in its wake. I sagged against Dylan, feeling drained. "I'm so sorry," he murmured into my hair. "I had no idea she'd go this far." I pulled back, meeting his worried gaze. "It's not your fault. But Dylan, we can't keep living like this. Something has to change." As we stood there, the remnants of our peaceful Sunday in tatters around us, I knew we were at a crossroads. Esther had pushed too far this time, and now we had to decide, our marriage or his mother. The battle lines were drawn, and I was ready to fight. I sat on our bed, staring at the framed photo of Dylan and me on our wedding day. We looked so happy, so full of hope. How had things gone so wrong in just over a year? "Penny, for your thoughts." Dylan's voice pulled me from my reverie. He sat beside me, his warmth a comfort I desperately needed. "I was just thinking about the day we met," I said, leaning into him. "Remember how scandalized your mother was?" Dylan chuckled, but it was tinged with sadness. "How could I forget? It was my 30th birthday party, and you were the stripper my friends hired as a joke." The memory of that night flooded back, as vivid as if it had happened yesterday. I'd been working my way through grad school, taking whatever jobs I could to make ends meet. When I'd shown up at that upscale party in my ridiculous cop costume, I'd been mortified to find it was a family gathering. "Esther nearly had a heart attack when I started my routine," I said, giggling despite myself. "And you." "I fell in love at first sight," Dylan finished, kissing my forehead. "Even if it took me a while to admit it, Our courtship had been a whirlwind, passionate and intense. But from the start, Esther had made her disapproval clear. I remembered our first official family dinner, just weeks after we'd started dating. She grilled me like I was on trial, I said, the old hurt rising in my chest. Where I was from, what my parents did, my 5-year plan, as if I was some gold digger after your family's money. Dylan sighed heavily. I should have shut it down then and there. I'm sorry, Hannah. I thought if we just gave her time, she'd come around. But Esther hadn't come around. If anything, her animosity had grown over the years. Every milestone in our relationship had been met with her thinly veiled disapproval. Our engagement announcement had been particularly painful. Do you remember what she said when you told her we were getting married? I asked, though I knew Dylan would never forget. His jaw clenched. She said I was throwing my life away on some floozy who would never fit into our world, that I'd regret it for the rest of my life. The words still stung, even now. I wanted so badly for her to like me, Dylan. I tried everything, cooking her favorite meals, asking for her advice, even offering to plan the wedding her way. But nothing was ever good enough. You shouldn't have had to try so hard, Dylan said, his voice thick with emotion. You're amazing just as you are. If she can't see that, it's her loss. I turned to face him, cupping his cheek in my hand. I love you for saying that. But Dylan, we can't keep living like this. Your mother's behavior is getting worse, not better. That stunt she pulled today with the fertility doctor, it's just the beginning. Dylan nodded, his expression grave. I know. I've been thinking about it all afternoon. Hannah, I think we need to set some boundaries with my mother. Firm ones. My heart raced at his words. Was he really suggesting what I thought he was? What kind of boundaries? For starters, no more unannounced visits. And if she can't treat you with respect, she's not welcome in our home at all. His voice was steady, but I could see the pain in his eyes. It's not going to be easy, but our marriage has to come first. I felt a mix of relief and trepidation wash over me. Are you sure? She's your mother, Dylan. I don't want to come between you. You're not, he said firmly. She's the one driving a wedge between us. It's time I stood up to her, for both our sakes. As we sat there, the weight of his decision hanging between us, my phone buzzed with a text. It was from my sister, Sadie. 911. Need to talk. Can you come over? I showed Dylan the message, concern creasing his brow. Go, he said. I'll start dinner. We can finish this conversation when you get back. As I grabbed my keys and headed for the door, I couldn't shake the feeling that our troubles with Esther were far from over. In fact, they might just be beginning. The shrill ring of my phone jolted me awake. I fumbled for it in the dark, my heart racing as I saw Dylan's name on the screen. Hannah, it's Mom. His voice was tight with worry. She's had an accident. We need to get to the hospital now. The next few hours passed in a blur of fluorescent lights and antiseptic smells. By dawn, we learned that Esther had fallen down her stairs, breaking her hip and wrist. The doctor's words echoed in my head. She'll need round-the-clock care for at least 6 weeks. I knew what was coming before Dylan even opened his mouth. Hannah, I know it's a lot to ask, but we have to take her in, I finished for him, my stomach churning at the thought. His relief was palpable. Just until she's back on her feet, I promise. As we drove to Esther's house to pack her things, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were making a terrible mistake. Esther was surprisingly subdued when we brought her home, the pain medication keeping her docile. But as the days wore on, her true colors began to show. Hannah, dear, she called from her makeshift bedroom in our living room. This tea is cold. Be a good girl and make me a fresh cup. I gritted my teeth, reminding myself it was only temporary. Coming, Esther. As I handed her the steaming mug, she wrinkled her nose. Oh, you've used the wrong tea. I only drink Earl Grey in the afternoons. You really should pay more attention, dear. I bit back a retort, forcing a smile. I'll remember for next time. Days turned into weeks, and Esther's demands grew more outrageous. She critiqued my cooking, my cleaning, even the way I folded laundry. Nothing was ever good enough. One evening, as I was preparing dinner, she hobbled into the kitchen on her crutches. What are you making? She asked, peering into the pot. Beef stew, I replied, stirring the fragrant mixture. She clicked her tongue disapprovingly. Oh, Hannah, Dylan doesn't like beef stew. He prefers chicken, you know. A good wife would know these things. I slammed the spoon down, whirling to face her. That's enough, Esther. Dylan loves my beef stew. He's told you this multiple times. Her eyes narrowed. Well, I suppose he's just trying to spare your feelings. It's clear you still have a lot to learn about being a proper wife. Before I could respond, Dylan walked in, sensing the tension immediately. Everything okay in here? Your wife is being very sensitive, Esther sniffed. I was merely offering some helpful advice. I opened my mouth to argue, but Dylan cut in. Mom, we've talked about this. Hannah doesn't need your advice on how to be a wife. She's perfect, just as she is. Esther's face darkened. I see how it is. You've turned my own son against me. Well, don't come crying to me when this marriage falls apart. She stormed off as best she could on her crutches, leaving us in stunned silence. I'm so sorry, Dylan said, pulling me into a hug. We shouldn't have brought her here. This was a mistake. I clung to him, fighting back tears. What are we going to do? We can't keep living like this. He pulled back, his expression determined. We'll figure something out, I promise. As we stood there in our kitchen, the beef stew forgotten on the stove, I couldn't help but wonder if our marriage would survive Esther's recovery. The woman was a force of nature, determined to drive a wedge between us. Later that night, as I lay awake listening to Esther's snores from the living room, my phone buzzed with a text from Sadie. How's it going with the monster-in-law? Ben and I are worried about you. I typed back quickly. It's worse than we imagined. I don't know how much more I can take. Sadie's response was immediate. Come over tomorrow. We need to talk. As I set my phone down, I felt a glimmer of hope. Maybe, just maybe, Sadie would have a solution to our Esther problem. Because one thing was certain, something had to change, and soon. I stood in front of Sadie's door, my hand poised to knock when it swung open. My sister's worried face greeted me, her belly swollen with her first child. Hannah, thank God you're here, she said, pulling me into a hug. I've been so worried about you. As we settled on her couch, the words tumbled out of me, every slight, every barbed comment, every manipulative tactic Esther had employed over the past few weeks. Sadie listened, her face growing darker with each revelation. Hannah, this is abuse, she said firmly when I finished. You can't keep living like this. I sighed, running a hand through my hair. I know, but what choice do I have? She's Dylan's mother, and she's injured. We can't just throw her out. Sadie's eyes narrowed. Can't you? Because from where I'm sitting, that's exactly what you should do. Before I could respond, my phone buzzed. It was Dylan. Hannah, where are you? Mom's having a fit because you're not here to help her with lunch. I felt the familiar knot of anxiety tighten in my stomach. I have to go, I told Sadie, standing up. She grabbed my arm. Hannah, wait, promise me you'll think about what I said. You deserve better than this. I nodded, not trusting myself to speak, and hurried home. The moment I walked through the door, Esther's shrill voice assaulted me. There you are. Where have you been? I've been calling for you for hours. I took a deep breath, trying to stay calm. I'm sorry, Esther. I was visiting my sister. Her eyes narrowed. Your sister? And what about your family here? Don't we matter to you? Before I could respond, Dylan intervened. Mom, that's enough. Hannah has a right to visit her family. Esther's face crumpled into a look of hurt that I was sure was fake. I see how it is. You two are ganging up on me. After all I've done for you, Dylan, I raised you, sacrificed everything for you, and this is how you repay me? I watched as guilt flashed across Dylan's face. Mom, that's not what's happening here. We're just... Save it, she snapped. I know when I'm not wanted, I'll just go back to my room and suffer in silence. As she hobbled away, I felt something inside me snap. That's it, I said, my voice shaking with anger. I can't do this anymore. Dylan looked at me, alarmed. Hannah, what are you saying? I'm saying that your mother is tearing us apart, Dylan. Can't you see it? The constant criticism, the guilt-tripping, the manipulation. It's destroying me, and it's destroying us. His face paled. I know it's been hard, but she's getting better. She'll be out of here soon. And then what? I interrupted. We go back to her dropping in unannounced, criticizing every aspect of our lives? I can't live like that anymore, Dylan. I won't. He reached for me, but I stepped back. I need some air, I said, grabbing my keys. I'll be back later. As I drove aimlessly through the city, tears blurring my vision, I realized I was at a crossroads. I loved Dylan with all my heart, but I couldn't keep sacrificing my mental health and our marriage for his mother's approval. My phone buzzed with a text from Sadie. "Have you thought about what I said?" I pulled over, my hands shaking as I typed my response. "Yes, I think it's time for some drastic changes." As I hit send, I felt a mix of terror and relief wash over me. I didn't know what those changes would look like yet, but I knew one thing for certain. Things couldn't go on as they were. It was time to take a stand for myself and for my marriage. The question was, would Dylan stand with me? I sat in my car, parked outside our house, gathering the courage to go inside. The sun had long since set, and I knew Dylan must be worried sick. Taking a deep breath, I stepped out and walked to the door. The moment I entered, Dylan engulfed me in a tight embrace. "Hannah, where have you been? I've been calling for hours." "I'm sorry," I whispered, my voice hoarse from crying. I couldn't be here anymore." He pulled back, his eyes searching mine. "What's going on? Talk to me, please." I took a shaky breath. "Dylan, I can't do this anymore. Living with your mother, it's killing me. It's killing us." His face fell. "I know it's been tough, but she's family. We can't just abandon her." "Can't we?" I asked, my voice rising. "Because that's exactly what she's doing to me, to us. Every day she chips away at our marriage, at my self-esteem. I'm drowning, Dylan." He ran a hand through his hair, frustration evident in every line of his body. "What do you want me to do, Hannah? She's my mother." "And I'm your wife," I shouted, surprising us both with my vehemence. "I need you to choose, Dylan, me or her." The silence that followed was deafening. I could see the conflict raging in Dylan's eyes, and for a moment I feared I'd pushed too far. Then from behind us came Esther's voice. "So this is how it's going to be. You're going to let this woman turn you against your own mother?" We whirled around to find Esther standing in the hallway, her face a mask of righteous indignation. "Mom, please," Dylan began, but Esther cut him off. "No, I want to hear what she has to say." Esther spat, her eyes boring into me. "Go on, Hannah. Tell me how I'm ruining your perfect little life." Something inside me snapped. All the pent-up frustration, anger, and hurt came pouring out. "You want to know? Fine, you're a manipulative, controlling woman who can't stand the idea that your son has a life outside of you. You've done nothing but criticize and belittle me from the moment we met. You've tried to sabotage our marriage at every turn. And I'm done. I'm done trying to win your approval. I'm done walking on eggshells in my own home." Esther's face turned an alarming shade of red. "How dare you speak to me like that? Dylan, are you going to let her talk to your mother this way?" We both turned to Dylan, who looked shell-shocked. I don't know what to say," he stammered. "Then let me make it simple for you," I said, my voice trembling. "Either she goes or I do. I can't live like this anymore, Dylan. I won't." The silence that followed was oppressive. I could see the war raging behind Dylan's eyes, torn between his love for me and his sense of duty to his mother. Finally, he spoke. "Mom, I think it's time for you to go home." Esther's gasp was audible. "Dylan, you can't be serious after everything I've done for you." "I am serious," Dylan said, his voice growing stronger. "Hannah's right. This situation isn't healthy for anyone. We'll help you get settled back at your place, but you can't stay here anymore." Esther's face crumpled, tears welling in her eyes. For a moment, I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. "Fine," she spat. "I see how it is. I'll go pack my things." As she hobbled away, Dylan turned to me, his eyes filled with a mix of relief and pain. "Hannah, I'm so sorry. I had no idea it had gotten this bad. Can you forgive me?" I felt the tension in my body start to uncoil. "It's a start," I said, offering him a small smile. "But we have a lot to talk about." As we stood there, the weight of what had just happened settling over us, I realized this was just the beginning. We had a long road ahead of us, but for the first time in months I felt hope. We had taken the first step towards reclaiming our life together, and I was determined to see it through. The morning after our confrontation with Esther, Dylan and I sat at our kitchen table, the air heavy with unspoken words. I clutched my coffee mug, my knuckles white with tension. "We need to talk about what happens next," I said, breaking the silence. Dylan nodded, his face etched with worry. "I know. I've been thinking about it all night. Hannah, I'm so sorry for not seeing how bad things had gotten. I should have protected you better." I reached across the table, taking his hand. "We both let it go on for too long. But now we have a chance to make things right. Just then, a sharp knock at the door made us both jump. Dylan went to answer it, and I heard Esther's voice, shrill and demanding, "Dylan, we need to talk, alone." My stomach clenched as Dylan let her in. Esther's eyes narrowed when she saw me, but she addressed Dylan as if I wasn't there. "I've been thinking about what happened last night," she said, "and I've decided to forgive you both for your outburst. I'm willing to give Hannah another chance." I felt my blood begin to boil, but before I could speak, Dylan surprised me. "No, Mom," he said firmly. "There's nothing to forgive. Hannah was right about everything she said last night." Esther's face contorted with shock. "What are you saying?" Dylan took a deep breath. "I'm saying that your behavior towards Hannah, towards our marriage, has been unacceptable. It stops now." "But Dylan," Esther protested, her voice taking on a wheedling tone, "I'm your mother. Everything I've done has been for your own good." "No," Dylan countered, his voice growing stronger. "It's been for your own good. You've tried to control every aspect of my life, and I've let you, but not anymore." I watched in awe as my husband, the man who had always tried to keep the peace, finally stood up to his mother. Esther's face hardened. "I see, so this is how it's going to be? You're choosing her over your own mother?" "I'm choosing my wife, my marriage, and my future," Dylan said. "And if you can't respect that, then yes, I'm choosing Hannah over you." Esther turned to me, her eyes blazing with fury. "You," she hissed. "You've turned my son against me. I'll never forgive you for this." I stood up, my own anger rising to meet hers. "I didn't turn Dylan against you, Esther. You did that all on your own." For a moment I thought she might lunge at me, but instead she turned back to Dylan, tears welling in her eyes. "After everything I've sacrificed for you," she said, her voice trembling, "this is how you repay me?" Dylan's resolve seemed to waver for a moment, and I held my breath. But then he squared his shoulders. "I'm grateful for everything you've done for me, Mom. But I'm an adult now, with a wife and a life of my own. If you can't accept that, then I think it's best if we don't see each other for a while." Esther's face crumpled. "You don't mean that. You can't mean that." "I do," Dylan said softly. "I'm sorry, Mom, but this is how it has to be." With a final, venomous glare at me, Esther stormed out, slamming the door behind her. The silence that followed was deafening. Dylan stood there, staring at the closed door, his shoulders slumped. I approached him cautiously. "Dylan, are you okay?" He turned to me, his eyes filled with a mix of pain and relief. "I think so. I can't believe I actually did that." I pulled him into a tight embrace. "I'm so proud of you," I whispered. As we stood there holding each other, I felt a weight lift from my shoulders, but a nagging worry persisted. Had we truly seen the last of Esther's interference? Or was this just the calm before an even bigger storm? Little did I know, our confrontation with Esther was far from over. In fact, the worst was yet to come. The weeks following our confrontation with Esther were blissfully quiet. Dylan and I relished our newfound peace, slowly rebuilding our life together. But as I pushed my shopping cart through the supermarket aisles, a nagging feeling of unease gnawed at me. "Hannah, over here," Sadie called, waving from the produce section. Her newborn, Lily, slept peacefully in a carrier strapped to her chest. I smiled, steering my cart towards them. "How's motherhood treating you?" Sadie beamed. "Exhausting, but amazing. How are things with you and Dylan?" "Better," I admitted. "It's like we can finally breathe again." As we chatted, comparing diaper brands and swapping recipe ideas, I felt a sense of normalcy I hadn't experienced in months. Maybe, just maybe, we had finally put the Esther drama behind us. That's when I heard it, a shrill, all-too-familiar voice that made my blood run cold. "You ungrateful little hussy." Before I could react, a blur of motion caught my eye. Esther, her face contorted with rage, was charging towards us. But she wasn't looking at me. Her eyes were fixed on Sadie. Time seemed to slow down. I opened my mouth to warn my sister, but it was too late. Esther's hand connected with Sadie's cheek with a sickening crack. Sadie stumbled backward, her arms instinctively wrapping around Lily. "How dare you turn my son against me?" Esther screeched, raising her hand for another blow. I snapped into action, throwing myself between them. "Esther, stop! That's not me!" Confusion flickered across her face, quickly replaced by renewed anger. "You, of course you're behind this. You've poisoned everyone against me." She lunged at me, but I managed to dodge her grasp. Around us, shoppers gasped and backed away, some pulling out their phones to record the scene. "Esther, please," I pleaded, trying to keep my voice calm. "You need help. This isn't right." "Don't tell me what I need," she spat. "You've ruined everything. You've stolen my son, and now you're trying to replace me with this imposter." She made another grab for Sadie, who was now sobbing, cradling a wailing Lily. I blocked her path, my heart pounding. "That's my sister, Esther. Your quarrel is with me, not her. Leave them out of this." Something in my words seemed to penetrate her rage. She blinked, looking between Sadie and me as if seeing us clearly for the first time. "Your sister?" she stammered. Before I could respond, security guards arrived, quickly restraining Esther. As they led her away, she began to wail, a sound so full of anguish it made my chest ache despite everything. I turned to Sadie, who was trembling, a red mark blooming on her cheek. "Oh God, Sadie, I'm so sorry. Are you okay? Is Lily all right?" She nodded shakily. "We're fine. Just shaken up." "Hannah, what was that? Who was that woman?" I sank to the floor, the adrenaline draining from my body. That was Esther, Dylan's mother. I thought we were done with her. As the reality of what had just happened sank in, I felt a wave of guilt and fear wash over me. This was my fault. My problems had spilled over, hurting my sister and her innocent baby. "We need to call the police," I said, my voice hollow, "and Dylan." "Oh God, how am I going to tell Dylan?" Sadie knelt beside me, wrapping her free arm around my shoulders. "We'll figure it out together. You're not alone in this, Hannah." As we sat there on the cold tile floor, surrounded by spilled groceries and gawking onlookers, I realized the truth of her words. I wasn't alone, but I also knew that this was far from over. Esther's actions had escalated beyond anything I could have imagined, and I feared what she might do next. The battle lines were drawn, and there was no going back now. It was time to end this, once and for all. The fluorescent lights of the courthouse seemed to buzz with the same nervous energy that thrummed through my veins. Sadie sat beside me, her hand clasped tightly in mine, while Ben paced before us, his lawyer mode in full swing. "The judge should be here any minute," he said, checking his watch for the 100th time. "Are you both ready?" I nodded, unable to find my voice. This was it. The moment we'd file for a restraining order against Esther. The thought of facing her again made my stomach churn, but I knew it was necessary. Just then the courtroom doors burst open. My heart leaped into my throat as Esther strode in, flanked by her own lawyer. Her eyes locked onto mine, filled with a mixture of hatred and something else. Was it fear? Before I could ponder it further, the bailiff called out, "All rise for the Honorable Judge Simmons." As we stood, I felt a wave of dizziness wash over me. I gripped the table for support, trying to steady my breathing. "Hannah?" Sadie whispered, concern etching her features. "Are you okay?" I nodded, not trusting myself to speak, but as the judge began to address the court, another wave hit me, stronger this time. The room began to spin, voices fading into a distant hum. The next thing I knew, I was blinking up at a circle of worried faces. Dylan's voice cut through the fog. "Hannah? Can you hear me?" I tried to sit up, realizing I was lying on the courtroom floor. "What happened?" "You fainted," Ben explained, helping me to my feet. "The paramedics are on their way." As I regained my bearings, I noticed Esther standing off to the side, her face pale and drawn. For the first time since I'd known her, she looked human. The judge's voice rang out. "Given the circumstances, we'll reconvene next week. Mrs. Walker, please seek medical attention immediately." As Dylan helped me out of the courtroom, I heard footsteps behind us. To my shock, it was Esther. "Hannah," she said, her voice trembling. I'm sorry for everything." I stared at her, unable to process her words. Was this another manipulation? But then I saw it in her eyes. Genuine remorse. The realization hit me like a tidal wave. This woman, who had caused us so much pain, was just as broken and scared as the rest of us. "Esther," I began, but she cut me off. "No, please. Let me finish. Seeing you collapse, it made me realize how much damage I've done. To you, to Dylan, to your family. I've been so consumed by my own fears and insecurities that I couldn't see the pain I was causing. I'll drop all charges and accept whatever restraining order you file. You deserve peace." Tears welled in my eyes as I looked at Dylan, seeing my own conflicted emotions mirrored in his face. "Mom," he said softly, "we don't want to cut you out of our lives completely, but things need to change. We need boundaries, and we need you to respect them." Esther nodded, tears streaming down her face. "I understand. I'll do whatever it takes. I don't want to lose my family." As we stood there, the weight of years of conflict seeming to lift, I felt another wave of dizziness, but this time it was accompanied by a sudden realization. "Dylan," I gasped, grabbing his arm. I think I'm pregnant." His eyes widened in shock, then joy. Even Esther's face lit up with genuine happiness. In that moment, surrounded by the people who had been at the center of this storm, I felt a profound sense of peace wash over me. We had a long road ahead. Healing takes time, and trust needs to be rebuilt. But for the first time, I could see a future where we all coexisted, not in perfect harmony, but with understanding and respect. As Dylan wrapped his arms around me, his hand resting protectively on my stomach, I knew that this baby, conceived amidst such turmoil, would be born into a family that had weathered the storm and come out stronger. Our journey wasn't over, but a new chapter was beginning, and this time we'd write it together.